got stuff dropping out everywhere here. Proverbs chapter 5. Okay. Now before I start the Bible study, I wanted to encourage the parents, those that have children who are learning scriptures, that they've got, basically they need to know what they know by next week. We'll give them a little bit of liberty to brush up on it the week after that, but in order to have the rewards ready to go and certificates printed and all that we're planning on doing, really need to know that next week. So they're going to start solidifying that, and several of them are sort of battling a little bit to go back and remember and get things finished up. So I want to encourage you parents to invest some time in them over the next week and a half, and help them to get caught up as best they can, and their reward will be based on what they know. Now every kid will get something, okay? And we want them to know that we value the effort that they've put in. But then there will be an additional reward that will go to the kids that have really put that effort in and have done some hard yards this year, okay? So when you think about the amount of memory being done each week by some of the kids, they've done a remarkable job. So please, parents, be on top of that. Please help them to be able to get that really nailed down and as little help as possible. Now, the younger they are, obviously a little bit more help. Then as they move up, they should get a little bit less help. Okay? Proverbs chapter number 5, we continue to talk about this woman called the strange woman. Just need to get back in my notes. I had to reprint my notes for all of the extras that I added in. Let me find my right spot here. Alrighty. I think last week that, yes, okay, we were talking about verses 9 through 13. Let's start in verse 8 for the beginning of the sentence. Remove thy way far from her, and come not nigh the door of her house, lest thou give thine honor unto others, and thy years unto the cruel. Lest strangers be filled with thy wealth, and thy labors be in the house of a stranger. And thou mourn at the last, when thy flesh and thy body are consumed, and say, How have I hated instruction, and my heart despised reproof, and have not obeyed the voice of my teachers, nor inclined mine ear to them that instructed me. I was almost in all evil in the midst of the congregation and the assembly. So we were talking here about the perils that are explained, and here's how I began last week, and then we'll skip to this week's material. That in verses 9 through 13 we talk about things that are lost. And the word lest that's used there in verse number 9 means that not, or for fear that, or so that one should not. Noticing the verses 8 through 13 again are one continuous sentence. We look in verse 9 where he says, Lest thou give thine honor unto others. So the first thing that is lost is you give away your honor when you get involved with a strange woman. The second thing that we looked at last week was that you give away years of life, again in verse 9, and that thy years unto the cruel. So you're giving these things away. And we simply just talked about those two things, I believe, last week. So I want to pick it up in verse number 10 as we continue on through this short section tonight. Verse number 10, he said, Lest again. So there's this fear. Lest strangers be filled with thy wealth, and thy labors be in the house of a stranger. And so what I want you to mark down tonight in verse number 10 is that the next thing that you can lose is you can give away your wealth and your labor. You can give away your wealth and your labor. And I think it's important for us to remember that this strange woman comes with a high price. And the things that have been earned by the man who gets involved with her through his sweat and through his labor will be lost. You can keep your finger there if you like, or find it again, but go to Hosea chapter number 7 and see how this is somewhat illustrated with the story of Hosea. If you're not familiar with Hosea, and yes, I still intend to try to finish going through that book at some stage. We didn't finish it. But Hosea, the man, was told by God to take a wife of whoredoms And so he did. He married this woman, and she continued to commit whoredoms, and they had children together, and then she ran off and committed whoredoms with many men, and eventually sold herself into slavery. And God came to Hosea after all that and said, I want you to go buy her back and make her your wife again. And so he did. And that's what the book of Hosea is about. It's an illustration of how God has had to tolerate the whoredoms of Israel, and how eventually the day will come, which, by the way, for those that are Bible Institute, it's especially, we've talked about this restoration of Israel over and over again. Well, there's another book that illustrates the restoration of Israel, that he's going to one day buy her back. And even though she may be Lo Ruhamah right now, not my people, the day's coming when she'll be Jezreel, my people. And that's what the book of Hosea teaches. So in chapter number 7, you're going to notice something here as we talk about the strange woman and the fact that they can have things you can have something taken from you that you worked hard for and not even know it. Hosea 7 and verse number 9, strangers have devoured his strength, and he knoweth it not. So here he is, he's talking about Ephraim, by the way, and he said these people, they've come in and they've taken the strength, and which I believe is the wealth and the prosperity of Israel. They've taken that away from them. They didn't even realize it. And I think that because of the context of the passage, we can relate that back to Proverbs chapter number 5, how the strange woman can do the same thing to a man. And by the way, the same thing can happen to a lady. You can lose the thing that you've earned and that you've worked hard for, and it can be taken away from you without you even knowing it. All right? If you go on in that verse, he just says, yea, gray hairs are here and there upon him, yet he knoweth it not. This guy's oblivious to what's going on. All right? And that's part of the deception of it. Now, not only will you lose the things you've earned by hard work, but I want you to go back to Proverbs 6. Proverbs 6. And Proverbs 6, we're going to learn in verse number 26. Let's read it and then I'll make the point here. Proverbs 6, verse number 26. For by means of a whorish woman, a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. We learn in this passage that one of the distinguishing marks of a strange woman is that she brings her prey to poverty. Right? That's what she does. She's stealing his wealth away. Isn't that what we read in verse number 5 or chapter number 5? Lest strangers be filled with thy wealth, and thy labors be in the house of a stranger. She steals it away. It's her nature to take money. Now, come on. We have all known somebody in this life that we'd say, wow, that woman took him for all he's worth. Right? Sometimes we talk about how these ladies marry rich men, and we call them gold diggers, but they sure display this type of behavior. They display this type of character of the strange woman, that she doesn't have pure motives in what she's doing. So she takes away what he has. And then if you look at verse 35 of chapter 6, you'll find that when it comes to adultery, so the strange woman can be an adulterous woman, that you're being warned about having to make endless payments if you get involved in that. So her husband finds out what's going on, and it says in verse 35, he will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though thou givest many gifts. So a man that gets into an adulterous relationship with that strange woman, and the husband finds out, and he's trying to say, I'm sorry, and he's giving gifts and making payments and doing whatever he can to make it right, he's just not happy. He's never going to be content. You're just at jeopardy of endless payments to try to satisfy not only your guilty conscience, but the wounded relationship of that gentleman. Do you see? It just all ties together. It's always this thing of, because of her character and what she's done, your wealth is given to somebody else. It's taken away. It's stripped away from you. I want you to consider over in Luke chapter 15 again, the prodigal son. So this is supposed to be Bible study night. We're flicking to a lot of passages, and that should be characteristic of a Bible study, I suppose. Luke chapter number 15. want you to think about what's said here about the prodigal son. All right, so we know the story. Father, give me my portion of your goods. I'm out of here. So he gives it to him, and off he runs. Proverbs 15, verse 13. Not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. Now, if you're a Bible marker or you're taking notes, it's worthwhile to just mark out riotous there. And then if you want to make a cross-reference, jump over to verse number 30. If you don't know what that word riotous means, this is in part a definition for it. Okay? Luke chapter 15, verse number 30 now. The context, remember, he's come home. The father's thrown the party for him. The older brother is upset. And so he's talking to his father. And here's his charge in verse number 30. But as soon as this thy son was come, now watch, which hath devoured thy living with harlots. You want a definition of riotous living? There it is. The older brother had him pegged. He knew exactly what was going on. He was with a strange woman, strange women. And he devoured his living. So he kills there the fatted calf. But just notice there in the context of what we're talking about here, that the prodigal son devoured his living with such women is what we're talking about, and really in an indirect way devoured the living of his father. It was his father's money, but he took that portion of his inheritance and squandered it. Why? Well, because the strange woman will lead a man to have his wealth in the house of a stranger and his labors in the house of a stranger. It will take your money from you. It'll take your wealth from you. Now here's a thought about wealth, okay? Wealth in the Scriptures is a type of your strength. Look at Proverbs 10. Everybody okay? All right, it's paying for you to have limber fingers tonight. Proverbs chapter 10 and verse number 15. The rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. So it's his strong city. It's his strength. Look at chapter 18 of Proverbs. In chapter 18 of Proverbs, verse 11, exact same phrase again. The rich man's wealth is his strong city, and as an high wall in his own conceit. That is, as he estimates his wealth, it's for him a high wall. Okay? Your wealth is a type of your strength. So poor people are considered weak, and wealthy people are considered strong. And that holds true in our society too, many times. We think of them as having strength and ability and, well-to-do. That's the way they're viewed, if you think about it in pictures. You know your mind works in pictures? Well, when you think of poor people, you don't think of strong people. Do you? When you think of wealthy people, that's when you start thinking of strong people. So it's a type of strength. 2 Kings chapter number 15. Second Kings 15 and verse number 20. And Menahem exacted the money of Israel, even of all the mighty men of wealth. You see it? The Scriptures are showing us that wealth is considered strength. These guys were mighty, not because they were wielding the sword, but because they had wealth. You say, what does that have to do with anything? Well, according to Proverbs chapter 5, your wealth can end up in someone else's possession. Your strength, your abilities. And Solomon warns us about that exact subject in Proverbs 31. Ladies, please don't get mad when I make some of the statements. I know sometimes I just say something very direct and I don't mean anything by it. But he gives us a great warning about giving our strength to a woman. Okay? And I don't think that this is only in regards to money or wealth. I think that there could be a lot of application to this, but it certainly applies. And in Proverbs 31, in verse number 3, Solomon said, "Give not thy strength unto women, nor thy ways to that which destroyeth kings." So men, as we're just trying to make some cross-references and just have a full application of this thing, according to Proverbs 5, any wealth that you've had, that you've earned by strength and sweat and labor, you can end up putting that in someone else's house and in someone else's possession and losing it if you give that strength to a woman for simply having the pleasure of the immorality. She'll take possession of it. How many of you have watched the news in the last couple days about the Hollywood actor named Charlie Sheen? How many of you have seen that? All right. I didn't see it, except that it doesn't make any difference. I finally went and watched it, all right? Somebody mentioned it, somebody else mentioned it, and I said, all right, I'll go look at it. So Charlie Sheen is a famous Hollywood actor, has been in a lot of movies, but he's also been in the news a lot in the last many years about the life that he lives, drugs, alcohol, immorality of all types. And about a month ago, there was this big to-do about a famous Hollywood actor who had contracted HIV and had AIDS and had potentially passed it on to many, many people. And I believe it was yesterday, he finally went on the news and he said, it was me, except I don't have AIDS, but I do have HIV. I'm HIV positive. Now, the reason he did that was because he had been extorted by several different people, including prostitutes, who he'd had these relationships with, and then they had taken photos and gathered information. They were using it against him to extort money from him. And he said it's gone into the millions of dollars that he's paid for them to keep quiet. Now, you know, there's so much to be said about that. I mean, there's Hollywood for you. All right, there it is. That's at its best. There's poster child, okay? So, you know, keep watching movies. They're really good for you. But what I want to say is this. Isn't this Proverbs 5 being played out? Isn't this man who decided that he could do whatever he wanted to do? And so he gets involved with the strange women, many of them, and ultimately what's happening? His wealth is being funneled off to these people. And he admitted it. He said, this is the product of my lifestyle. Guys, there's a living example. What more do we need? It's not worthwhile. By the way, can I make a comment on that whole thing? Because there's a pastor that's just getting all sorts of publicity about what a great guy he is. And he said, boy, you know, that poor Charlie Sheen. That poor Charlie Sheen. He just needs somebody to love him and not cast stones at him. And I thought, are you nuts? The way of a transgressor is hard. He's not showing remorse because he lived that lifestyle. He's upset because people were stealing money from him. He's on international television talking about all of these immoral behaviors that he's had. He's not batting an eye like it's a problem. He never said, I shouldn't have done it, or I wish I hadn't done it. He's just saying, well, the problem here is they're taking money from me. This man's twisted. He is messed up in his head, poor Charlie Sheen. Come on. I want him saved just like anybody. But he's not going to get saved till he admits that his behavior is wicked and godless. So if you see Pastor Locke, you can just give him a copy of this video and tell him that's courtesy of Pastor Beier. We're friends, by the way. We knew each other from a long time ago. We were friends until somebody sends this to him. All right. You lose your wealth. You give your wealth and your labor away. And then back in Proverbs 5, you give away your joy. You give away your joy. Look at verse 11. and thou mourn at the last, when thy flesh and thy body are consumed. You're mourning. In fact, we can just go right on in verse 12 and 13 and say, how have I hated instruction, and my heart despised reproof, and have not obeyed the voice of my teachers, nor inclined mine ear to them that instructed me. Notice exclamation point. So, well, that wasn't in the original. Well, it's in my original. They put it there because he's making an exclamation. They put it there because he's saying, hey, I despised this reproof and this instruction that I was given. I'm a fool. That's the whole point. He lost his joy. The word mourn means to grieve for sorrow and to lament something. And I want you to notice that he says in verse number 11, and thou mourn at the last if thy flesh and body are consumed? What does he say? When? Oh, you mean like HIV? Or some other of these diseases? Just same interview. Charlie, do you know how you got it? I have no idea. Well, were you sharing needles? No. I never shared needles with anybody, so it wasn't through drug use. Well, there's only one other way. I have no idea how I got it. It's insanity. Yay for Mr. Sheen. What a hero. Same thing that they did for Magic Johnson when he got HIV. What a hero Magic Johnson is. He's come out and tell everybody all about it. He was immoral. This goes on over and over. Guys, that's Hollywood. Some of you guys are filling your heads with those people and their movies. And your hearts with it. And this is the debauchery. This is what they're all about. This is what they live for. Got to wake up. This isn't about movies tonight, but it sure is easy to kick them while I'm here. So he said, when your flesh and your body are consumed, when this happens, and so we mourn and we give our joy away by losing a sound body. And there's some things I want you to notice here. God's design is for one man and one woman to enter voluntarily into a relationship for life. That's His design. Is there divorce that comes? Of course. It does come. And it's tragic. And I hope you know that this church, if there is any church around that is compassionate towards you if you've been through a divorce, we are and we want to be. And we know that sometimes it just happens, it's outside of people's control. And I'm counseling someone right now going through a separation and divorce right now. And it's totally out of their hands. And they don't want it, but it's going to happen. I understand that. And I know what the Bible teaches about it. And by the way, we've got messages on that. You're welcome to look them up and listen to them and hear them. Because we're your friend. We're not against you. We don't hold that against you, and it's not the unpardonable sin. But guys, it's tragic. It is tragic. God's design was for us to voluntarily enter into a relationship with a man or a woman, depending on what gender you are, and it should always be the opposite, just in case there's clarification needed on that, and to stay there. And we stay with them no matter what. No matter what. Guys that are in a marriage particularly, no matter what happens in that marriage, you're not handed an excuse to go out and to violate that marriage bond. You're not. You made a commitment to God that you would keep that marriage bond no matter what. Ladies, the same for you. There is no excuse. They don't plant, your bad spouse doesn't plant adultery and fornication in your heart. You know how many times I've heard that in the years of counseling that I've done? Well, if they hadn't done this, I hadn't done that. No, Jesus said that what enters into you doesn't defile you. It's what's in your heart and comes out that defiles you. And it is impossible for one of us to go plant one of those things into your heart. We can't do it. If it's there, it's because you allowed it to be there. You fostered it. You meditated on it. You let that thing begin to develop and grow in your heart, and all it took was an excuse for that to come out. You say, that's pretty hard. It might be, but it's what the Lord said. There is no excuse. Secondly, to willfully violate this and treat it with contempt will bring with it disease and destruction. Hebrews 13:4, God said that whoremongers and adulterers God would judge. And I believe that this physical judgment is both a short-term and a long-term judgment from God on that particular sin. I want you to go to Psalm chapter number 38. Psalm 38, verse number 3. And please notice the context here. It says it's a psalm of David to bring to remembrance. And he says in verse 1, O Lord, rebuke me not in thy wrath, neither chasten me in thy hot displeasure, for thine arrows stick fast in me, and thine hand presseth sore. Watch, there is no soundness in my flesh because of thine anger. Neither is there any rest in my bones because of my sin. Whatever David's talking about here, and I understand that this is my opinion and my own speculation. A lot of people happen to hold this same position, that this psalm was written as a result of his relationship with Bathsheba, and that he contracted a disease as a result of that, and that this psalm is written as an explanation of that, as him mourning that and regretting that and asking God to have mercy on him about it. Whatever the case is, he's lost the soundness in his flesh. And then you look at verse number 5. My wounds stink and are corrupt because of my foolishness. I am troubled. I am bowed down greatly. I go mourning all the day long. For my loins are filled with a loathsome disease, and there is no soundness in my flesh. I am feeble and sore broken. I have roared by reason of the disquietness of my heart. Lord, all my desire is before thee, and my groaning is not hid from thee. My heart panteth, my strength faileth me. As for the light of mine eyes, it also is gone from me. My lovers and my friends stand aloof from my sore, and my kinsmen stand afar off. Whatever he had, it made him a foul person. No soundness in the flesh. And boy, I'm almost out of time here. You not only mourn because of the loss of your sound body, but mourn because of refusing instruction. And back in Proverbs 5 again, the whole context being this loss, or this mourning time of verse 11, thou mourn at the last when, and thou say. And there's 4 things here that he says about instruction. He said he hated it, he despised it, he disobeyed it, and he treated it lightly. Verse 12, how have I hated instruction? That is, somebody, in other words, Solomon's saying this. This is going to be the result of the individual who ignores what I'm writing to you here in chapter 5. If they ignore this, this will be their result. They'll say, I hated instruction. They'll be mourning. I wished I'd have listened. And then they'll go on in verse 12 and despised reproof. That means that there was behavior going on that somebody came to him and said, you better watch yourself. That right? You don't reprove somebody that's not doing anything wrong. You reprove and rebuke those who are doing wrongly. You exhort those who are doing right to continue to do right. You see? So somebody's just on the edge, not quite doing right. Maybe they're not right, falling right into it yet, but they're just not behaving themselves soundly. Somebody reproves them, and they said, you know what? I despise you for reproving me in that matter. Okay. And then he says in verse 13, I didn't even obey it. I haven't obeyed the voice of my teachers. They told me how to avoid this, and I didn't. They told me that this would happen. I didn't care. And then he treated it lightly again, verse 13. I didn't even incline mine ear to them that instructed me. You know, they're talking, and here's what I hear. Yada, 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 blah, 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 blah. Now, this kind of preaching and teaching, it can go on around the world in every church all the time. You know what's going to happen? Somebody's going to go, yeah, whatever. And good churches and good families and good people are hurt in the process. I want to finish up with this. Adam Clarke writes a commentary, and he's from many, many years ago. And he wrote this. He said, in the line of my duty, I have been often called to attend the deathbed of such persons, where groans and shrieks were incessant through the ejaculating pains in their bones and flesh. Whoever has witnessed a closing scene like this will at once perceive with what force and propriety the wise man speaks. And how have I hated instruction and despised the voice of my teachers? Is the unavailing cry in that terrific time. Reader, whosoever thou art, lay these things to heart. Do not enter into their sin. Once entered, thy return is nearly hopeless. Simply, when the time comes that the relationship with the strange woman is mourned, and it will come, there will be a deep regret without any possibility of recovery for ignoring the instruction of those who warned you. In other words, it's just too late. All right. Father, please take these words again tonight, and please do, as Mr. Clarke said here in his writing, that they would be taken to heart, and that people would guard themselves, men and women both. Father, please help us to keep a watch around those affections and around our eyes, and that we'd be like Job and make a covenant with our eyes that we'll not look upon a maid. Father, I pray that we'd be like the psalm writer that said that we'll not set any wicked thing before our eyes. I pray that we would be just the opposite of what's talked about here in Proverbs 5, that we would listen to the voice of instruction and that we'd regard reproof when it comes. And Lord, please again, I pray it, as I have so many times over the last many weeks, that you'd put a hedge around our church and protect us from this type of behavior. Well, thank you for it. Please dismiss us with your blessing. We ask it in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. All right, we're